Good afternoon, folks. We are nearing the end of the day, so thank you for still being here, coming along to my talk. I'm going to talk a little bit about how we can best leverage AI as a tool for learning instead of doing. I'll speak a little bit about why I put this together, and show you some pictures of unicorns. That's a real unicorn, just because any opportunity to do that is always to be used. And then at the end, there should be some time for questions, but because it's the first time I'm giving this, I make no promises. So if there's no time for questions, you can find me at the Umbraco booth and ask me questions at any point. So I'll start by telling you, no, we need to be on this one, who I am, what qualifies me to give this talk. And I'm going to ask someone to take a picture because it's great that I've managed to keep this up. I'm the VP of Developer Relations at Umbraco. Thank you, Phil. Thank you, Seb. It's good to have friends in the audience when you give a talk for the first time. I'm VP of Developer Relations at Umbraco, and I'm a .NET developer. I'm an Umbraco developer who also worked with .NET. Back-end developer, really, although I've had to do things at the front end. I'm not good. Don't try and hire me to do any of that. You will regret it. I'm also a Microsoft MVP, really passionate defender of open source, again, because of my background, and I'm a qualified teacher. Funnily enough, secondary school teacher here in London, English literature. So a little bit of an about turn there. So I have switched career from one thing to quite a different field. Before I talk to you about AI, coding assistants, and our opportunities for learning, I want to tell you a bit about where I live on the cheerleader to skeptic spectrum. I wish it were a straight line, but I think it's more of a loop because I go round and around all the time. So when AI coding assistants first hit the kind of popular landscape, my first thought was, oh my goodness, I wish I were a junior now instead of when I was a junior. I wish I had access to this tool. This is an incredible opportunity to make progress, to learn. I think we talk a lot about productivity, efficiency. I'm not that interested in those things, especially being in developer relations. I care about prototyping. I care about getting from nothing to something, scratching itches, the dopamine release that comes from, making a thing work. And this whole landscape was just so attractive to me. So I became very, very excited about the possibilities, and people around me were saying, we should worry. We need to worry a little bit more about AI. And I was saying, no, I'm not worried. We're smart, we'll be fine. The industry will be fine because we're clever. I've come full circle because I've had moments where I've watched things blow up on the internet, people getting rid of entire development teams because they can do everything with AI now. And I've realized that as a species, we're not that smart. I think we might all be in that place in 2026. And the reason I decided to give this talk is that I've spent an awful lot of time learning how to learn. Before you learn how to teach, you must learn how to learn. And when I did my teach training, that's what we spent a lot of time learning about. When I was teaching, I learned even more about the possibilities of learning, and then I switched career to become a developer, and I was a full-time learner, and I had a really, really interesting time of it. I was very grateful that I thought a lot about learning before I had to actually do the learning. And so the last year, I've been working on this talk. Don't ask me how long I've been working on the slides or practicing, because it's not a year. But for the last year, I've had various thoughts that I've wanted to rant at people at conferences. Tip to anyone who's never been on stage and done a talk before, that's the thing you need to submit a talk for. The thing that you want to rant at people about at conferences, you should do it from this point because you've got a microphone, so nobody can argue with you until afterwards. So before we talk about, I want to go on to explain a bit about where I'm at because I should talk to you a little bit about my biases. So obviously I'm very biased because I'm interested in learning. So I see it all like a coding assistant, and that's the lens through which I see it. I don't see it as a kind of accomplished senior developer with 20 years of experience behind me. I see it more of a kind of, okay, what would I do with this? And my perspective is blinkered, incredibly blinkered. Being a career switcher, having to ask people for help all the time, feeling a little bit out of my depth after already having an established career. Ooh, scary, weird. So very, very biased. But I'm also very accustomed to hearing a lot of the doomsaying around things like this. So when I entered the industry, it was like, oh, everyone will go to Stack Overflow, copy code, paste it, and they will not know what that code does. So when I started hearing people talking about coding assistants, I was like, isn't this the same conversation? And actually, it isn't. Like, I wanted to believe it was, but it's more complicated than that, and we'll talk a little bit about why. My experience is that you couldn't copy and paste code from the internet. I loved like this kind of notion that we were going to have a whole generation of developers that would just know how to copy and paste, and then things would get into production that basically sucked and introduced all these vulnerabilities, were impossible to maintain. I don't think I've ever pasted any code successfully that just works, like let alone getting it to work. In order to get it to work, you have to understand what it does. With coding assistants, we don't necessarily have to understand what it does to get it to work. And therein lies the danger. So super biased, but what I plan to do is take you through a number of different things that we look at that are barriers to learning. Because when we're talking about the crisis of often junior developers, but it could be experienced developers, blindly using code that's been generated by AI, we have a number of concerns that I think we talk a lot about. And they're basically barriers to learning. So I used AI to make these slides. When I wrote this slide, I had fought with AI for hours trying to make a slide. I ended up copy and pasting. I'm a copy and paste generation of developer. But I used AI throughout the planning of this talk. I used AI as a sounding board, a sparring partner. I used AI especially for the things that I don't care about, like how the slide should look. Now, why did I do that? I did that because I don't care about becoming a better designer. I care about being a good speaker. I care about delivering a talk that's of value, so I didn't use AI for any of those things. And that kind of critical approach to using these tools is what I'm going to try and champion throughout the talk. We should be using AI to do the things that we don't really care about developing in ourselves. And we should be using AI very differently when it's something we wish to get better at. So the barriers to learning that we already talk about, I think comes down to, or I would like to sum it up in 3 different ways. If we're using coding assistants, it's just too easy. Things that are too easy, it's not really a judgment call, it's actually a very good instinct, because in order to have anything like quality learning, what we really need is for there to be effort. We need struggle for learning to work. That's one of the cognitive or parts of the learning cycle, or one of the learning cycles that I'll take you through. We genuinely need to struggle in order to learn anything effectively. So when things are that easy, it freaks us out, and it freaks us out for the right reasons. That's one of the barriers to learning that we have to worry about when we're talking about the prolific use of coding assistants. There's also this idea of garbage in, garbage out. How much rubbish code is being generated, because how much rubbish code is feeding the models that are generating the code. And really, there's not a lot of, we really don't know is the answer. When you've got somebody at the other end who doesn't understand what they're saying thumbs up to, then of course there are concerns. And then I think the third thing that we talk about in very cloaked terms, but we don't necessarily say outright, is there's kind of a moral element to this. Like, you can't cheat. I'm really into board games, and I will not play it with people that don't play properly. Like, if you're cheating, what is the point in playing? And I think some of us experienced developers bring an element of that into this debate too. It was hard for me to learn, should be hard for them to learn. So I think these are some of the things that we do discuss when we talk about what the barriers to learning are. Things that we don't, and some of the things that I think a lot about with my teaching background, is the lack of an opportunity to really solve problems, not so much socially, but using a thinking partner, having a thinking partner. You can always tap somebody on the shoulder, although if they've got both headphones on their ears, you shouldn't. That is a good rule with developers. But the effort that it takes to really tap someone on the shoulder, the time that we lose when we're doing that, the context switching we're asking people to do, it can be very difficult to find and establish a routine or a rhythm with thinking partners, and we need that for learning. We need to externalize our learning. Reasoning is another big part of it. If we're skipping stages of the thinking and the problem solving, then we're not getting the opportunity to do proper cognitive reasoning when we're solving problems too. We can't learn if we skip any of those stages. The lack of places for trial and error, that is a worry. I've worked in a number of different kinds of companies, sometimes like in-house software, sometimes with clients at the end of the line who are asking me to bill for every single hour. What did you do? What did you do? And then, of course, the idea that I should make a mistake in public. I've worked a lot on open source libraries. I'm not really a big fan of looking stupid in public. It happens usually by mistake. I don't want it to happen by design. But unfortunately, it's a really good opportunity for learning. We have to make mistakes in order to learn, to iterate. And then, of course, there's the last thing, which is cognitive exhaustion. How much time do we lose doing the work that we shouldn't really be doing, that isn't very smart, that certainly isn't adding to our learning? And what it depletes. It doesn't just make us not feel good, it actually genuinely depletes our capacity for learning. So these are some of the barriers that I think we're up against that we're not talking about. And if we talk more about them, we can see some of the opportunities that there are for AI to help us, for coding assistance specifically to help us. Now, I'm probably going to use the words coding assistance and AI, or the acronym, interchangeably. But when I'm saying AI, largely I'm speaking about coding assistance or large language models when I'm doing this talk. But I will switch. I'll probably just say one or the other. So there are 5 ways or 5 opportunities that I think that we have when we're talking about learning to use coding assistance effectively. So learning needs to be hard. Learning needs to be difficult in order for us to make any progress or to make any, or to really embed anything into our knowledge systems. And this isn't me being old-fashioned, it's not a judgment system, like genuinely we have a number of reasons as to why that should be the case. Does anybody know what this is? IDSPISPOPD. This is a cheat code for Doom. It was my favorite cheat code. This is the no-clip cheat code for Doom. When you typed in IDSPISPOPD, I'm 43 now. I cannot believe I still remember this. But when I thought, oh, IDKFA, I was like, no, IDSPISPOPD is things I can't remember that. Anyway. If you put this in, if you type this into your keyboard, you could walk through walls. You could still play the game. You didn't have to worry about the route that you took, and you could explore the whole level because, you know what, you were invincible and you could walk through all the walls. It was great fun for like an hour, but you can't continue to play the game because it's just not hard enough. Like, I'm a big fan of video games that are just hard enough. They sit in that sweet spot, and it's not because it's not down to taste, it's actually around development. If we want to develop ourselves in any field, whether it's Doom or video games or programming, we actually need things to be just slightly too difficult for us or we flatline. Now, if things are too hard, we also make no progress. So the question of, is this too easy, comes up regularly. If you're sitting just, I don't know, for 2 years just solving the same bugs, your job is not just uninteresting, you are not learning anything as a developer. The whole thing of, when I said, I think there's a moral element where we're worried about this being too easy, this is not to be confused with that. This really is a genuine concern, because if we're not challenging people effectively, we lose them. They don't just lose the interest, they really will flatline and are unable to do the next thing and the next thing. Now, if we challenge them with something that that's almost impossible for them, where the resources are not at hand and their experience doesn't line up, then we lose them too because they hit the wall. It sounds a bit doomy because how do we manage that inside teams? Or if we're a one-person team, if we're not working with anyone? In the old days, I mean, like 10 years ago, I used to say go to meetups, become part of a tech community, spar with other people. But it's even easier now because we actually have access to coding assistants. So this whole thing about it being too easy is not just me, it's Lev Vygotsky. Vygotsky was like, I think probably the first theorist we learned about when I was at uni. And his whole thing was that there is this sweet spot, and it's called the zone of proximal development. And if you can arrange tasks as, say, a classroom teacher, so that every student was just challenged enough and not too challenged, then learning would be accelerated. Sounds great. When I was working in London, I had 32 kids at a time, mixed abilities. It was really, really tough. When I was learning to be a developer, I had like a bunch of busy people that were managing projects that didn't really have as much technical understanding of the projects as I did, or maybe the others. It's really, really difficult to get that sweet spot in terms of tasks when all you want to do is hand out work or give people challenges. The worst thing is when you're an experienced developer and you're trying to show somebody how to solve a problem, you have to solve the problem to show them how to solve the problem. So you're doubling up. So I think this is really where the sweet spot comes in. Now, I saw this reel, they call them reels on Instagram. I saw this reel on Instagram when I was building this talk, and it was really nice to see actually, because it's this notion, it's an account called Big Thinkers, and they just say clever things. That's their whole reason for existing. And they talk a lot about this zone of proximal development, and actually they link it back to artificial intelligence too. There's a reason why when you walk into a room and there's a baby, your first instinct is to start talking like this. And it's not, it feels patronizing. Some people refuse to do it. But it's actually so that you can scaffold their learning. Like we learned, I guess, instinctively, we now know that if you pitch something at just the right level, people will reach you there. They will meet you there. Very, very reassuring to know that we already have this instinct in a landscape where we've got these tools available. So, once again, perhaps we don't have to worry too much about the choices people are going to make, but maybe we do. So how do we use this in a work setting? How do we make our coding assistants baby talk with us? Or how do we make them the perfect classroom teacher who can structure a task so that we meet that task exactly where we need to be? The only way to do it is to get really, really chatty with your coding assistant. It's not to prompt and ask for an answer, it's to really spar with your AI. I think one of the biggest mistakes we can make in this landscape is picking up, like whatever new AI tool is hot right now, prompting a couple of times and walking away and being like, that was helpful. It's what I did when I was trying to build the slides, actually, because I don't care about image generation or the way things look. I sat there, I asked it for a thing, it gave me the wrong thing. And in the end, I wrote, this isn't working before I close the window, because I believe you should be chatty, but you need to really develop that relationship with your AI tool. Because once you get to that point where it has enough context to I'm really trying not to humanize it by use words like understand, enough context to serve you with the answers that are going to make the most sense to you. You have this incredibly quick way of understanding what it is you need to do next. My itch that I can never scratch, and I was saying this just as I came into the room to my friend and colleague Phil, when I entered the industry, it was like 2012, and I thought, great, it's not like when I was a kid and I had to get books out from the library to code. I can actually go online and there's this wealth of resources, but it was so hard to find one that spoke to me in a language that I could understand. I won't watch video tutorials, for instance, just can't hit play on a video. I'm ADHD, neurodiverse as they come, but there are certain areas where I just think, I really wish I could have this resource in another format, and now I'm in a landscape where I actually can. And it's not to say I can't progress with the other resources, just that my energy to get to that point is so much smaller. So you need to make friends with your coding assistant. You need to start asking it to speak to you in the way that you need to be spoken to. I don't mean like explain like I'm 5, great Reddit thread that used to help me when I first became a developer. I mean very much like, why did you make this choice though? Not this is wrong, this isn't working. Why did you make this choice? What assumptions did you make? There are so many questions that you can ask to probe your coding assistant that will teach you ever so much. It's rarely about the output, it's rarely about the code snippet. It's often going to be about the sparring that takes place before you get to that point, or after you get the wrong answer. So, I should drink a bit of water. That's what happens at this point. Making mistakes. It's really difficult to make mistakes. It's difficult to make mistakes in public because it's embarrassing, but it also costs money. Most of us don't get the luxury of just coding for fun, and some of us code for fun when we're not getting paid to code for not fun or for money. So making mistakes is essential and very, very difficult to build into our workflows. There's the playground, a space for trial and error. It's not just a nice to have, it's essential for all of our stages of learning. In the run up to this talk, I was thinking a lot about the experiential learning cycle. And there's a fella called Andrew Culp, and his idea, actually, I have a diagram, so I'm not going to explain it without you being able to look at it. There we go. His idea was that actually the way that we learn begins over here in concrete experience and ends in active experimentation. So if I'm trying to learn something simple, I should start somewhere here. I have the actual experience. Here is my problem and I'm going to solve it. I need to spend some time in reflective observation. So reflecting on the experience, how is this? This is my thinking section, and this is also a lot of thinking. So we've got the beginning and some thinking, and then here it's the doing. The doing stage is really important for solidifying learning. You can't really get to the point where you understand something fully unless you are in a position where you need to do the thing too. I always say a really good way of, if it's a very abstract concept, so it's not like you're building a chair or a piece of software, but it's something more abstract, a good doing place is trying to explain it to another person, because the minute you start trying to explain something to another person, you realize the limits of your understanding. So some things have to happen here, which is fine. That's great news, except I think quite often we end up here in the 3 steps. And the way that, my experience in this area is you go to a new project and the documentation can get you this far. But by the time you try to get here, you really can't get anything started. Or I'll be trying to work with a prototype, something really exciting has happened, even our own in-house software. I'm like, oh, I'm going to have a play with the latest version. I haven't done it in a while. I spend ages just trying to get my environment set up. And then I end up just reading about it, just thinking, and never in the doing phase. So we tend to see learning as linear, but it isn't. It's cyclic. So we really need to make space for the possibility of active experimentation. Some people spend all of their weekends working on their hobby projects, and that's incredibly inspiring, and you will see them flourish in the workplace because of the unrelated work that they're doing elsewhere. It's kind of a hack. It's not a hack because it doesn't save you time, it costs you time, but kind of a hack in that sense. So Barbara Rogoff is a really, really good theorist to look at here. And she builds on the work of Andrew Culp because what she's looking at is the idea of metacognition. So in this instance, we have an opportunity to take the learning that, in the way that Rogoff explains it, is that the moment we take anything from the abstract into the more practical space, that's when our learning accelerates and we have an opportunity to build on it and start the cycle again. So we continue to iterate, we go round and around the cycle. I don't think I need to spend much time explaining to you why coding assistance or AI gives us that opportunity. It takes us from nothing to something really, really quickly. It can remove such a lot of the barriers to experimentation. I wouldn't spend a whole day setting something up. I would have that opportunity to sit with Uncle Claude, as we call Claude Code, and just play. And play makes it sound kind of frivolous, but I really can't tell you how unfrivolous this is. This is the space where we solidify our learning. Now, in our workplaces, I don't know how you sell this to your boss. It's a tough one. We've got it built into our processes. Our engineering team have 2 days of every sprint just to play. So this is cycle hack time, and it's time where you're not allowed to spend time working on the sprint. You have to spend time working on something else. You could read a book, you could build something, you can do whatever you like. And we demo it to each other too afterwards. We did something a little more radical around AI recently. And what we ended up doing, instead of just making playtime compulsory, we actually made it compulsory to do an entire sprint working with AI. You'll notice that the slides changed because I just dragged them straight in from the survey. So we've got a team of 53 engineers. Probably a third had not worked with AI, any AI tools. And I think probably 2/3 didn't regularly, were largely skeptical. But by the end of the sprint, and let me just frame what we did in the sprint, we asked everybody to use it to do the normal sprint. You can do your normal work, but you need to use AI tools. Got all the licenses, cost a fortune, listened to a lot of grumbles, and put one person in the hot seat as advisor and said, he's nice, talk to him if you're having problems. And these were the results. It was extraordinary. But what I loved about the results wasn't even just so much like, oh, people liked it. They kind of didn't. They were very, very skeptical. And I'll go on to talk to you about this later. People became very critical around how to work with AI. So one of the things that we had was an opportunity to get people that didn't want to really go into the landscape to then reflect more critically around the landscape afterwards. So the skeptics and the cheerleaders met somewhere in the middle. I think it becoming a daily habit, that's tough. Like, you can teach me a new keyboard shortcut that would save me so much time and I won't integrate it if I don't make it a habit. Like, building habits is really hard. And as developers, we spend a lot of time kind of configuring our workflow in a way that makes sense to us. We think by doing even along the way, even to the point where we get the problem. So the fact that we were able to convince this number of people to make it part of their daily habit, I think is a really big win here. It's not like, oh, we put out so much work. That really wasn't the point. What we enabled people to do was look at different ways of solving the same problems and just expand their toolkit. And that's really, I think that's really incredible. So mandatory playtime, big fan of the notion. I was thinking a bit about, oh wait, no, I've missed there we go. Yeah, this one's a feelings one, sorry. I want to talk a little bit about why it's scary to do some of this, to be a learner. I like looking competent. It's kind of a thing. I don't want to leave the house without looking competent. And it's a real barrier to learning. It makes me really crappy at learning because one of the things you have to be comfortable doing in order to make progress in the first place is admit that you have gaps, admit that you don't know what's going on. And I used to spend a lot of time looking at Stack Overflow, but I never posted. I've never posted a single thing. I guess I've been doing this for 11 years now and I've never posted anything there. Don't need to now, it's dead because of AI. But, back then I never would have. And then I did some training with Umbraco. The Umbraco developer training back then was level 1, level 2, and I did my level 2. And at the end, the guy that was running it said, you should go and spend some time on the Umbraco forum and answer some questions. And I was like, is it like Stack Overflow? He was like, yes and no. And of course, it's nothing like Stack Overflow in that people there are nice. But the culture is nice, like overwhelmingly nice. But it's exactly like Stack Overflow in that it's where you go to solve your problems, your niche developer problems, and speak to other developers. And I did do it. That's why I got some points. This is old now. This website's no longer live, but proud enough of that moment to have screenshotted it. I went on to become a code contributor. I wrote code in public and submitted it to an open source repository. It didn't work for Umbraco then, you see. So all of this was something I never could have done if I didn't feel safe. And the reason I tell you that is because the amount that I learned in collaborating with people I'd never met before and never will meet on the internet who had similar interests, experience, and niches as I did was astronomical. It's the same if you're contributing to open source, and this is where I'll say I'm passionate about open source. There is nothing that accelerates our learning more than working in public, making mistakes in public, and collaborating with people that you do not do your day job with. Making a space for learning where it's safe to learn, it feels good. And it works. So it's not just feelings, because actually it works. And there's a lot of educational theory behind this. Once again, not just being a hippie, didn't just make it up. Nell Noddings wrote a paper back in the 90s that talks about the ethics of care and safety, and it links learning to, or the learning processes to spending time solving problems in spaces where your nervous system is at rest, where you feel safe, because there's an awful lot of chemical and neurological and what's it called? The firing. Wow, never mind. Brain stuff, the neuroscience, there we go, that backs up this idea that we cannot learn effectively while we don't feel safe. It's a real blocker to learning, to effective learning. So learning requires a safe environment is what her study told us. And a lot of developers, we're people that are used to feeling competent, you know, like we're probably, my self-esteem, I'm not going to speak for you, but my self-esteem is very linked to how smart I feel on any given day. So the notion of showing up and looking very, very silly, I'm already going to make it feel unsafe. You are going to have to tiptoe around me. You're going to have to make it feel very nice and cozy. So the amount of energy that goes into then asking for help is stacked up against this like fear of appearing foolish. It was a relief to read this paper and know that I wasn't just being a wimp. Like my brain processes demand safety in order for me to become an effective learner, and I am not alone in that. So ultimately, it's not that it's not going to be scary. It's going to be scary, but it mustn't be scarier than it needs to be. Critical thinking dies very, very quickly in social situations when people are worried about things like looking foolish or being judged. I love taking AI and asking the same question like 5 different ways because I didn't ask it right the first time. Has anyone here ever asked a question not right on Stack Overflow before? Have you seen what happens to people that don't ask the question the right way? Like, it's not just a judgment-free space. Judgment can't exist because there's nothing human about the thing that you're interacting with. It's like a notepad that can respond. So even before you get to the point where you have to consider, is this a stupid question, you've asked it. It's never, ever going to appear as part of your workflow. Now, it's not going to answer all your questions, and nor should it, but it is going to help you ask the right question when you tap someone on the shoulder and you ask a real person, an actual experienced human, to work with you on it. So I think it's a really, really good space for that. You end up with less social fatigue, more curiosity and better thinking. Not my words, because this is what the paper and many, many other papers, she's built on a lot of research from Piaget too. We're in a territory that's very, very well known, but has never really been used when we're looking at the impact of AI. So, how do we do this? All right, this is a people thing. This is a cultural thing. We need to work harder to destigmatize the use of AI. I know so many people, really smart people, who will just refuse to engage with any idea of AI as a tool because they don't want to enter that landscape. Because there's not a lot of, as I've said, there are a lot of very, very well thought out, understandable concerns about the space, but we need more experienced and clever people using these tools. We need people who have got 20 years of developing behind them to engage in that landscape. What we don't want is just a landscape of brand new people uncritically engaging with it. We need to be doing it too. And if we're stigmatizing a space where I've just told you we've finally got this like stupid question box that we can put the stupid questions into, we really take away that power from that tool. We need to be very mindful about the language we use. And I think it's also very powerful if we start talking about the ways that we're using it and what we're using it for. Because you can get 10 developers in a room who all say they're working with coding assistants. They're all doing it differently. I would love to hear more about what we are doing. I have never met an experienced developer that is asking AI to just generate code. Like, no, like that's the fun part of the job. But there are so many other ways that we can work with the coding assistants before we get to that point. So yeah, destigmatization is going to be key. Or we really, really miss an opportunity here to get people over some humps, that, let's face it, we don't want to do. We don't necessarily want to sit with someone, especially if we're in some sort of flow state, and answer their questions all day long. Like, let's destigmatize using the tool first, or last, or in the middle, whilst reminding people that human interaction is still going to be a key part of any learning and problem solving. So, we talk a lot about critical reflection. We're losing our ability to think critically, not just in this space, but in many. I watched a talk at an event in November in Manchester, and it was absolutely hilarious. I'm not going to try and make it funny because I can't, because that would be mad. You had to be there. But I'm going to give you the gist of it, because what we watched was a friend of mine, a very experienced developer, showing us how he was working with AI. And he was taking us through a slowed down demo of what Claude Code was doing, hand in hand with Playwright, to try and hack his own site. And the reason this was happening was just because he hit run and he'd forgotten to change the permissions. And so rather than, it didn't just stop working, what it did was say, oh, I've got access. If I do this, I can go in through the front end, I can block. And we watched it just try and hack the site. And we all laughed because it was funny. But it's only funny because we know what it was doing wrong. Now, there's every chance that somebody brand new to the industry could watch that happen and go, oh, that's how you log into the back end of Umbraco. So that's cool that it did that for me. And absolutely it wasn't. It wasn't even just a workaround, it was a hack. And you need to be able to think, you need the experience in order to be able to think critically in that space. So we can't go in just expecting it to solve our problems. And I think this is something that actually we all know. This is something that freaks us out quite a lot in this space. So for this, we can look back to Malcolm Knowles, the godfather of andragogy. Andragogy is the study of adult learners. Adults learn entirely differently to young people. And one of the things that adult learners need is a solid knowledge base before they can enter into problem solving. And we learn best that way. We're not learning anything from scratch. I mean, we might be, but most of adult learning is adding learning to already solidified learning. It's a different challenge entirely. And he breaks it down into these 4 stages. This is the real meat of learning as an adult. We need to be comparing, we need to be weighing, we need to be rejecting, and we need to be refining. And it's a bit scary to think that there are learners out there that are going to skip some of these stages, because if you skip any of these, you are not going to learn how to think critically. So you're solving a problem and you are handed a solution, and maybe you have done really well at scoping the problem in the first place. So there's some weighing there. Maybe you've rejected the first answer that you've gotten. Maybe you'll end up doing some refining. But one thing that these coding assistants are very good at is just stealing parts of our learning cycle, stealing different parts of our learning journeys. And we need all 4 of these to hit before we can say that we've really learned something. Now, we can't teach people to think critically by telling them that coding assistants are going to destroy our sacred profession. And we can't teach them to think critically by saying this is too easy. We need to really drill down into what stages they're missing. And I think one of our big wins that we have available here, unfortunately it's another cultural one, I wish I could give you a technical solution to this, is in encouraging people to look into how we learn while they're engaging with these tools, to really think about the tools as something that we use to get better at what we do rather than to get more productive in what we do. So the way that we do this internally, that screen, is we teach people to ask the right questions. And I've put AI in brackets because actually this is a developer skill that is so underrated anyway. We need to be teaching people to ask the right questions. In order to ask the right questions, we really need to understand what problem we're solving. I think we need to normalize introducing any tool, but certainly AI, at a later stage in our problem-solving journey. So if we're presented with an issue, we need to be using whatever your equivalent of a notepad and pen is before we get to the point where we start prompting and refining our questions with AI. So really, really well used, our coding assistant actually becomes a really good place to test our thinking instead of the oracle that just solves stuff for us. Things like, show me one way to do this, or what assumptions have you made when you generated this code? Super, super valuable. My favorite one, why might this be a bad idea? It's generated code for you. Why might this be a bad idea? And it's great at answering things like this. You can watch, and next time I do this, I'll have some demos, but you can watch these sparring sessions where it will serve you something that's clearly trash. Or why did you think this was a good idea? Or why might this be a bad idea? And it will reason with you and for you. And you learn so much more from that process of reasoning than you would from just accepting that if the code was right, it's a bad opportunity for learning. If the code is wrong, it's a really good opportunity, or not fit for purpose, really good opportunity for learning. So instead of consuming output, you're actually evaluating competing options, and it comes back to that comparing, weighing, rejecting, refining, and take conscious notice as you go through each one of those steps. I'm comparing, I'm weighing, I'm refining, I'm rejecting. And if you can tick all four, then you're having a learning experience. So inside of our company, our team, we decided that we would continue working with AI tools. And the big win that we felt we had was that people were still worried. They were still genuinely skeptical, very, very critical around what we do and how we use AI. We have a culture where we verify and we do not blindly trust. Now, I think we're very fortunate to be in a position where we've got a CTO that's like, yeah, let's do it. And then we've got in-house experts that are like, yeah, we know about this. And then we've got, we're kind of we're a company that loves experimentation. We've got this big developer community where a lot of the innovation actually happens outside of our company. So we love this stuff. We're into it. And I get that. We can't all be into it. But it really gives me hope that we're in a position to kind of introduce a tool like this for everyone to love it, but to still be like, we need to work carefully with this. So the last barrier to learning that I think AI can really, really help us with that I want to speak about is cognitive exhaustion. Cognitive exhaustion's an interesting one because I think we've all experienced it before. I think we've all kind of had some version of hitting a wall. And the way I like to describe it is from zero to flow. Like this is the state, somewhere between zero to flow. This is the state that cognitive exhaustion usually takes place. After flow, we're in a good position. We can probably work for hours and forget to pee. We're in that place. It's a really, really good place to be. But up until flow, miles and miles. Sometimes it can be like an hour of getting set up or doing grunt tasks grunt work and fighting with our environments. Or it could be reading documentation. It could be reaching the limits of that documentation, throwing it out, picking up a new solution. But zero to flow, that's the space where cognitive exhaustion is most likely to happen. A good many projects and ideas have died in that space. And not just projects and ideas, people's careers. You spend too long in that place, you're not cut out to be a developer, you don't want to be a developer anymore. Because who would want to live there? And it's great that we get to not live there. The amount of tricks and kind of the bits of automation, the kind of setup things, the people I outsource some of the setup things to, can you help me with this? These are all tricks to get from naught to flow. It's always to avoid cognitive exhaustion. Cognitive exhaustion is an absolute disaster because by the time you get to the point where you're really, really engaging in problem solving, you literally have less left. You have less energy left. It's not that you're tired. No amount of Red Bull is going to get you there. The neuroscience says your brain has a finite amount of load that it can handle. Your working memory is depleted. It's completely maxed out on the stuff that shouldn't really matter. I remember earlier when I was like, I used AI to help me make the slides look nice. I could not care less about those things, but did it cost me? Yes, it cost me. Did it make me tired? Absolutely, it made me tired. Did it make me less creative later? The neuroscience says absolutely yes. And the things that matter suffer if we spend too much time in the other place. So Anne Brown wrote a paper on metacognition where she talks an awful lot about executive control, self-regulation, and motivation. And one of the things that she understood was that there is a big difference between the stuff that we just need to know and then the solving stuff. Those are my words, they're not hers. She wrote really eloquently about this. And it's broken down into these two spaces. We've got the extraneous load, don't do that, and the germane load. The extraneous load, extraneous, it's the stuff we don't need. It's the grunt work. And then the actual learning all takes place in the germane load. And this is built on John Swindler's theory too. John Swindler wrote a piece, or more than one piece, just looking at cognitive load theory. And it's about having your learning completely blocked because your working memory is maxed out. It's so obvious, like, what we can do with AI to get past this phase. Like, I love this idea that we get to go from a blank page to something. I love when my colleagues will be like, oh, I made this. Don't look at how, just look what I made. And you can get a proof of concept for an idea that you could have worked days on just to find out it wasn't a great idea in the first place. You can do that in 2 hours now. And it's not cheating. It's genuinely a way of iterating through solutions that we couldn't have discarded before we had these tools available. We could not have discarded all of these MVPs that were not the answer in the speed that we could do it. The momentum feeds momentum. So it's not so much that we're just getting there quicker, we're actually learning more. We're actually giving our brains the opportunity to create new neural pathways, to grow, and then to start the cycle again and again. So we could, my original name for this talk was Clever and Cleverer, because I was like, oh, it's a play on Dumb and Dumber. It just didn't work, because we really do have this opportunity to, if we're thinking about how we learn when we're learning, to actually get much, much smarter in much, much less time, to solve bigger problems in more creative ways, because we're doing those learning cycles again and again, without being blocked by the stuff that doesn't matter. So the way I was looking at this, and I mean, I don't know if this is fair, I think this is something you can fight me on, is that it's kind of like automation. You know when there's a task that you're just like, I don't want to do this every time I have to do this. So we solve it by just automating. There's an argument that AI is similar in this space. I was thinking about when Codespaces launched and the kind of, does anyone get mad about the fact that people can go from having like nothing to an IDE in seconds? Probably not. Like, it doesn't seem super controversial that you can build everything that you could build using Visual Studio, which took an age to set up, configure, get exactly as you like, decide whether you want night mode or dark mode or whatever. Now you can do in Codespaces a lot of it, not all of it. It's because we mustn't live in the places that don't really matter, not if we're hoping to be smart and get smarter. So when it comes to these things, I want us to look at AI a little bit like we look at automation. It's just normalize the can't be asked with all. Like, there are certain things we shouldn't be asked with, and there are certain things we should. Critical thinking, super, super important, but there are so many parts of the developer journey, Googling regex expressions, like, that we just shouldn't be bothering our brains with. Not because we're too busy, too smart, or too important, but literally because we have a finite amount of cognitive load, finite amount of working memory. So we need to normalize the can't be asked of it all. I will say we need to interrogate the solutions that we are served, but only to a point. Like, there's a point where we should just be like, yeah, thumbs up, thanks, don't care. When we're building prototypes, when we're trying to get an MVP together, when we're trying to solve problems related to stuff we would have Googled in the old days like regex, let's CBA with that. I just don't think it's worth our time and energy. So in a sense, I think AI can replace, if we look at AI like we look at automation, less stigma, less weight, and we're in a position where we just get to spend our time and energy on the things that really matter. The deep work and the deep learning. So, I am really wedded to old theories. Every study that I've presented you with came from, I think the most current was 1994. So we're going back to an age where, yeah, AI existed, but not in the shape that we know it now. When we're training teachers, we're still looking at these old theories because, you know what, brains haven't changed that much, but the tools have. When I was saying at the beginning, like, it's basically like copy and paste, really it isn't, not just because of the opportunities. We've never experienced anything or in my working career, I haven't experienced anything this powerful, not just for learning, but for destroying the process of learning too. These old theories still fit to a point. The old theories are fantastic because, yes, our brains are still the same. I'm dying to see what the impact of the way that we use technology in a modern landscape affects our brain geography going forward. Really, really interested, but I might not be alive long enough to see what happens with that. So I'm not an expert in any of these things, but I've really enjoyed taking the old theories and applying them to this new landscape. But one of the things that I do is keep an eye out for what the real experts are saying in this space. And the fantastic thing is people are doing things. They're doing a lot of things. There are new studies all the time in this area. The studies cannot keep up with the rate of change, people. There is no way, especially not the way that we do we study educational theory and we talk about it. There was a study, a Harvard study found, I think it was like 2 months ago, that an AI tutor is more effective than classroom learning. They did this with Harvard students. There were 233 research participants. The AI tutor accelerated learning, but it wasn't as good as a human tutor. So you've now got this kind of space where people in the classroom are learning something. My kids are 15 and 16, so they are going to school 6 hours a day and being taught by these grown-ups for most of that time. But arguably, they could be learning a little more with an AI tutor on the same topics. Arguably, let's say this one study is right, but they'll never be learning more than if they had an expensive private tutor sitting with them. But for the first time in their lives, my kids get to have both experiences. They get to do their maths with an AI tutor. That's incredible because I can't remember maths from when I was at school. And they still get that in-house class experience, which is incredible to me because that gap was missing. In order to have the tutor, you needed money. You needed access to these things. And we're democratizing access to things that are good. They're not perfect, they're not great, but they're very good. And everybody, or not everybody, but many of us have access to those tools. So these new studies are really, really encouraging. We're still, like society's not going to change overnight. We're still going to work in teams the shape that they are, and we're still going to be educated in schools that are, in this country at least, follow a very kind of post-industrial revolution pattern. But we are in a shifting landscape and we don't really know what the impact's going to be. And I want to be asking questions, and I want all of us to ask each other questions, and I want us to do it without this kind of shame that comes from working with tools that maybe make our lives just a little bit too easy. Because I don't think many of us are using them in that way. I think most of us are using them very critically. And what I'd love to see is more people showing me exactly what kind of things they're doing with AI. Not the cool stuff they built, but the cool ways that they're engaging with it, because I think that's a very fertile landscape. I think we're going to see a lot of cool tips and tricks once we've really come to accept as an industry that it's here to stay and that we should be worried, but we should also be looking for the opportunities. So where on earth do we land? Great, I've solved it. I've solved all of this, and I can tell you, don't know. Like, I actually don't know where we'll land. We haven't landed. That's the problem. We really haven't landed. People that are working with AI every day are just like, don't know. The rate of change is, it's a pace that I haven't seen in the industry. I've not been here for a long time, but people that are much more experienced than me are saying the same. And we're making it up as we go along. And do you know what? I love that. That's how I like to work. That's how I'm really, really delighted to be alive now. And I'm really delighted to be working in tech now, because this is the most Wild West it's been. Everything's up for grabs. We're seeing huge companies just like, I'm going to fire my whole team. I'm crashing and burning. Like all of it. Sorry, that's fun to watch. But we're in like this kind of anything's possible. Oh, no, it isn't. And it could be. No, it is. And we're getting to witness that and learn from that. I would love to do this talk a year from now and for it to be like largely different concerns, largely different ideas, totally different technology. And all of that's possible because if I did this a year ago, it would have been an entirely different talk. So I think we need to, or the place that I'll end, where do I land, is that AI is an incredibly powerful tool as long as we don't view it as a replacement for thinking. I think that we need to sidestep the doomsaying, look for the opportunities, and share what we're learning as we go. And I'll stop talking.